Good day, senior high school students. For you, what is political dynasty? Are you in favor of an anti-political dynasty bill? Alright, to answer those two questions, let's try to analyze important issues relating to our lesson to be discussed. The class will be divided into two groups. Each group will choose a leader, a recorder, and a timer. The leader will defend the arguments of their group according to what they believe. The recorder will act as the group secretary to gather the ideas from their members on a certain issue being argued. The timer will control the opposing group in a given specific time on expressing their ideas. Your subject teacher will act as the moderator. The title of our lesson is Politics of Kinship. In this lesson, we'll be talking about political dynasty and political alliances. But first, let's have our objectives and guide questions. At the end of the lesson, we'll be able to analyze aspects of social organization, identify one's role in social groups and institutions, and describe the importance of kinship as part of cultural, social, and political institutions. What is politics of kinship? How political dynasty being defined? What are political alliances? Most citizens are aware that when we say political dynasty, it refers to families whose members are involved in politics. And when we say political alliance, referred to as political coalition or political bloc, is an agreement for cooperation between different political parties on common agenda, often for purposes of contesting an election. There is the so-called Carnegie effect, named after Andrew Carnegie, based on Carnegie's decision to give all his wealth to non-family members. Carnegie believed that his son might have less incentive of working hard if he were to be assured of his father's wealth. But how political dynasties in the Philippines emerged? According to our source, in May 2019, elections showed a light on political dynasties and how they can collapse in a single day. There is so much talk about political dynasties that you'd think that these are fairly recent phenomena, something that appeared just after the Philippines gained independence in 1946. A closer look at history says otherwise. In fact, it is quite possible that some Filipino lawmakers today have ancestors from 300 years ago who passed down government positions to this progeny. A political dynasty is a family of politicians who serve in one place or country and are able to pass or extend government positions to kin for the purpose of expanding and maintaining its hold on power. Why there are political dynasties in our country? It was during the time of Spanish colonialism in the Philippines when the foundations for political dynasties were laid. When the Spaniards conquered the islands in the 16th century, they found that there were thousands of communities all over the archipelago, each led by a datu or raja. The Spaniards did not really conquer the entire archipelago on their own. That was impossible. In order to subjugate the peoples of the islands, they enlisted the help of these datus. The Spaniards established reduction, a system where they put entire populations under one centralized government. It eliminated the barangays that were headed by datus, in exchange for giving up their barangays and encouraging their people to resettle in the new towns called cabecera. The datus were offered positions in local government as gobernadorcillo and cabeza de barangay. The Spaniards knew that in order to keep populace under their control, they needed to keep the former datus happy. They were given the status of Principalia, a member of the local nobility. The Principalia were given houses in prominent locations in the cabecera, which was either in front or beside the church. Up to now, Houses beside or in front of a church are considered prime locations in any community, signifying wealth and prominence of social status. But who are the members of the Principalia in the Philippines? As Gobernadorcillos and Cabezas de Barangay, the former datos, now Principalia, were charged with the responsibility of collecting tributes from their former subjects. They also selected people who will render forced labor. These arrangements became so susceptible to abuse, and many Principalia used their position to extort, threaten, and demand excess payments from the people. According to Abenales and Amoroso, the Spaniards never wanted to disenfranchise the Indios, so they introduced the concept of land ownership so they can legally buy land from the natives. But the Principalia saw an opportunity in this new idea. They sold and donated to the friars the public lands that they were originally tilled by their subjects, effectively enriching themselves and gaining more political capital and favor from the religious orders. Apart from these excesses, the Principalia enjoyed official benefits and privileges. They were exempted from paying tributes, taxes, or doing forced labor. Lastly, the status of being Principalia was hereditary, including the government positions they held. Because of these things, the members of the Principalia became powerful, influential, and wealthy politicians who controlled vast tracts of agricultural land. Although it was the Spaniards who inadvertently laid the ground for the contemporary political dynasties in the Philippines, it was the Americans who actually formalized it. According to Professor Roland Simbulan of University of the Philippines, political dynasties in the Philippines started during the American occupation. They introduced elections to the Philippines, but only gave suffrage rights to members of the Principalia. Furthermore, government positions were also limited to Americans and members of the Principalia. This resulted in the widening gap between rich and poor Filipinos, especially with the Principalia working in politics for their own interests. Today, there are many Filipino political clans who can trace their ancestry to the Principalia who served during the American colonial period. According to University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies, in 2016, 74% of elected members of the House of Representatives come from political dynasties. The recent 2019 midterm elections reminded us that although political dynasties are entrenched, they are not permanent. They can also end as long as there are relevant and credible forces that would challenge their status quo. Our country have some laws pertaining to legitimacy of holding office by our leaders. Like for example, the Article 2, Section 26 of 1987 Philippine Constitution states that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities to public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. Another one on Republic Act 7160 or the known Local Government Code in Book 1, Title 2, Chapter 1, Section 43. The term of office of all local elective officials elected after the effectivity of this code shall be 3 years, starting from the noon of June 30, 1992, or such date provided by law, except that of barangay officials, provided that all local officials first elected during the local elections immediately following the ratification of the 1987 Constitution shall serve until noon of June 30, 1992. No local elected official shall serve for more than 3 consecutive terms in the same position. Voluntary renunciation of the office for any length of time shall not be considered as an interruption in the continuity of service for the term which the elected official concerned was elected. The term of office of barangay officials and members of the Sangguniang Kabataan shall be for 3 years, which shall begin after the regular election of barangay officials on the second Monday of May 1. Alright, is political dynasty clear to you now? Why it is still existing in our political culture and why we are enjoying about them? Or the other way around? Now let's talk about political alliances. When we say political alliance, in the early slides, a coalition government is formed when political alliance comes to power or when only a plurality, not majority, has been reached and several parties must work together to govern. Now let's talk about political and leadership structures. Political organization. When we say political organization, it is a political institution defined as the system of norms, values, and rules responsible for maintaining social order in the society. Examples of aspects in maintaining social order is creating formal norms, applying sanctions, settling disputes among individuals, and settling disputes between nations. We have the so-called bands, a very small, oftentimes nomadic group that is connected by family ties and is politically independent. We have the so-called tribes, a more complex than bands, characterized of some large equestrian and foraging societies. According to anthropologists, the new mechanisms of tribes are referred as pan-tribal associations or sodalities. They have commonly a village headman. There's also the so-called chiefdoms, similar to bands and tribes but differ in having a more or less permanent, full-time leader with real authority to make major decisions for the societies. And we have the so-called states, while chiefdoms are societies in which everyone is ranked relative to the chief. States are socially stratified into largely distinct classes in terms of wealth, power, and prestige. Now let's move on. Authority and legitimacy. When we say authority, there are types. The so-called traditional authority, when the ability and right to rule is passed down, often through heredity. We have also the so-called charismatic authority, found in a leader whose mission and vision inspire others. And the other one is legal rational authority, empowered by a formalistic belief in the content of the law, legal or national law, national. And about legitimization, it is the popular acceptance of an authority, usually a governing law or regime. There are types of legitimacy. Traditional legitimacy derives from societal customs and habits that emphasize the history of the authority of tradition. Charismatic legitimacy derives from the ideas and personal charisma of the leader, a person whose authoritative persona charms and psychologically dominates the people of the society to agreement with the government's regime and rule. National legal legitimacy derives from a system of institutional procedure where government institutions establish and enforce law and order in public interest. There are forms of legitimate government. There is the so-called communism that derives from having won a civil war, revolution, or from won an election. It was like the nature of Marxism. We have also the so-called constitutionalism, establishes the law as supreme over the private will. And the known for us is the democracy, derives from the popular perception that the elected government abides by the democratic principles in governing and thus inaccountable to its people. And the so-called then fascism, headed by a dictator in which the government controls the lives of the people and opposition is not permitted. And we have the monarchy. The divine right of kings establishes the political legitimacy of the role of the monarch, as either king or queen, from the popular perception. tradition, and custom, and acceptance of the monarch as the rightful ruler of nation and country. Thank you. See you in our next lesson.